What really happens to children who were spanked? A scientific analysis. If you were spanked as a child, even if it was for discipline, this video is for you. If you continue spanking your own children, this video is also for you. Most people believe that physical punishment simply teaches discipline. But what if I told you that it actually changes the brain? That scientific studies prove it's not just trauma, it's a fundamental shift in a child's psychology that affects their entire life. Today we are breaking down what happens in a child's brain when they're physically punished, the long-term consequences it creates, and why even mild punishments lead to deep psychological limitations. And most importantly, what you can do about it. My name is Lana Bugela, and I help people integrate trauma so it no longer controls their lives. Today, we are going into the scientific evidence of how physical punishment rewires the brain and impacts a person's entire future. Quick announcement: 80% of people watching my videos aren't subscribed yet, and that's not fair to you, because you might miss out on powerful content that can truly change your perspective. If personal growth, self-awareness, and building a happier life matter to you, make sure to subscribe right now. This is the best time to do it because YouTube values subscriptions the most while you're watching. And most importantly, drop a comment below. Have you ever heard someone say, "I was spanked and I turned out fine"? So how physical punishment affects the mind? We will dive into scientific findings how physical punishment changes a child's brain. When a child is hit, their brain reacts the same way as someone facing a life-threatening situation. Fear, paralysis, a surge of cortisol, the stress hormone. This isn't discipline, it's a survival mode activation. A Harvard University study confirms that even mild physical punishment alters a child's brain structure, forcing it into survival mode. The areas responsible for logic, analytical thinking, and self-control shrink due to chronic stress, while the amygdala, the brain's fear center, becomes hyperactive. What does this mean in real life? A child learns not to trust but to fear, not to analyze but to obey. They stop asking why and instead focus on avoiding punishment. They no longer see relationships as safe, and this pattern follows them into adulthood. One of my clients shared that as a child she was terrified to tell her parents the truth out of fear of punishment. If she admitted to breaking a cup, she knew she'd be hit. But if she kept quiet, maybe no one would notice. And what happened? In adulthood, she struggled to communicate openly with her partner because her subconscious mind had learned that honesty equals danger. There are long-term effects of physical punishment in adulthood. Research from the American Academy of Pediatrics shows that physical punishment increases the risk of depression, anxiety, and even lower cognitive abilities in adulthood. Why? Because a child who grows up in constant fear cannot freely develop. Another study published in the Journal of Pediatrics found that children who were physically punished are more likely to struggle with impulsivity, anger, and aggression. Why? Because the brain learned that power equals control. They either unconsciously repeat this pattern in their own behavior or attract people who dominate and suppress them. All the links to the studies that I've mentioned I put in the description below this video. So let's continue. One of my clients who was hit as a child told me, "I never understood why I kept ending up in toxic relationships. Everything seemed fine at first, but over time my partner would start belittling me, controlling me, making me feel guilty, and I tolerated it because deep down I believed love had to be earned." This is a classic trauma response. If you were punished when you did something wrong as a child, you may start associating criticism and harsh treatment with love in adulthood. Another client shared, "In my family, they always said children should be raised with firm hand. I was hit, and it taught me to stay silent. At school, I was afraid to raise my hand because I feared making a mistake. At work, I always agreed with my boss, even when he was wrong. I became obedient, not happy." There are some additional consequences of physical punishment. First is lower self-esteem. Children who were hit often grow up feeling like something is inherently wrong with them. They believe they're not good enough deep down in their bones. Second, relationship issues. Fear of openness, inability to trust, and tolerance for abusive dynamics. Third, increased anxiety and depression. The brain becomes accustomed to living in a state of stress, making adulthood feel even more overwhelming. Fourth, tendency for self-harm. People who were physically punished as children are more likely to devalue themselves, endure cruelty from others, and even punish themselves. I was hit and I turned out fine. This is the biggest self-deception. One of the most common phrases people say is I was hit and I turned out fine. And mostly I hear that from people who are now doing the same to their own kids and they're trying to feel good about themselves. But what does fine actually mean? If you're afraid to express your emotions, is that fine? If you can't say no without feeling guilty, is that fine? If you tolerate toxic relationships, is that fine? The brain adapts to trauma. That doesn't mean it wasn't there. It just means you learned to survive it. But do you really want to pass that experience down? One of my clients used to say, I was hit as a child and I turned out fine. But when we started analyzing his life, it became clear that he spent his whole life avoiding conflict, constantly trying to please everyone, and struggling to express his own opinions. He wasn't aggressive, he was a nice guy. He didn't lash out, but his psyche was still shaped by fear. Is that really fine? And also, there is the illusion of strength, when toughness feels like power. But that's not all. There are other people who have an illusion of strength when toughness feels like power. So, another side of this story when people mistake trauma for strength. When they believe that being physically punished made them strong, ready for anything, they say, I was raised this way and I became tough. I know life is harsh, so I'm prepared. And they raise their children the same way, continuing the cycle. But let's take a closer look. This person didn't become strong. They became emotionally closed off. They don't allow themselves to be weak because they were taught that weakness is shameful. They don't ask for help because they were taught that needing support is weakness. They don't allow themselves to be vulnerable because they were taught to take the hit. They struggle to build deep, trusting relationships because they were taught that love equals control and power. One of my clients once said, I never let myself cry because I was raised to believe that a man has to be strong. But do you know what happened? His wife left him because he couldn't show emotion. His kids were afraid to talk to him because he didn't know how to express warmth. He thought being tough was a good thing, but in the end, he lost the people closest to him. False strength is when you learn to endure pain but not how to love. When you learn to be tough but know how to be happy. When you survive but you don't know how to truly live. So what does this person lose? Deeper relationships because they never allow themselves to trust. Emotional flexibility because they believe people are either strong or weak and nothing in the middle. The freedom to be themselves because they're constantly playing the role of the resilient one. The ability to feel happiness because their brain is wired to always expect danger. So physical punishment doesn't make people strong. It teaches them to tolerate pain as if it's normal. And that's not strength, that's trauma. So here is the real question. Do you really want to pass this experience on? Do you want your children to grow up confusing fear with love, toughness with strength, and pain with discipline? If you've ever told yourself, I was hit and I turned out fine, ask yourself again, what does fine actually mean to you? So what's next? If you're watching this and realizing that some of this applies to you, that's already the first step. Because once you see the truth, you can't unsee it. And most importantly, if this resonates with you, share your thoughts in the comments. What effects do you see in yourself? Did physical punishment shape the way you see the world? Your comment isn't just for you. Someone else might read it and recognize themselves in your story. So what to do if this is about you? I'll give you some keys. Key number 1, recognize that fear is not love. Just because you were hit doesn't mean it was for your own good. Love doesn't create pain. If your upbringing left you with fear, anxiety, and constant guilt, it wasn't love, it was abuse. One of my clients kept attracting toxic partners for years. She didn't understand why she always ended up in relationships where she was ignored, belittled, or punished with emotional distance. When we started working together, she realized that her mind had normalized pain. She grew up believing that love had to be earned, that she had to be convenient to avoid punishment, and awareness was her first step toward change. Key number 2, separate discipline from trauma. Raising a child through fear doesn't teach them, it breaks them. Discipline is about learning, not submission. But if you were punished with force, your mind learned that making mistakes equals deserving pain. One of my clients shared that even as an adult, he was terrified of authority figures. Any harsh tone or criticism sent him into panic mode. He never defended himself, even when he was right. Through our work, we uncovered that in childhood, he was physically punished for any disobedience. And he had internalized the belief that questioning authority equals danger. He never realized that his fear of bosses and confrontation wasn't about his job. It was about his childhood experience. It's crucial to understand discipline is about responsibility, not humiliation. But if authority was enforced through fear, your mind perceives it as a threat. This is a subconscious program you can rewire. And a key number 3, give yourself the love you didn't receive as a child. If a younger version of you stood in front of you right now, would you hit them? Or would you hold them? Would you explain that making mistakes is okay? Would you reassure them? Many of my clients struggle with self-compassion. They say things like, I have to be strong, I just need to accept it, or crying is weak. But when we did an exercise where they imagined themselves as children, they finally understood. They didn't want to repeat this cycle. They didn't want to keep punishing themselves for every mistake. And for the first time in their lives, they felt they could be kind to themselves, not just demanding. You can give yourself that support now. No one can change your past, but you can change how you respond to it. And that is the most powerful step towards freedom. But here is the real question. How do you change these subconscious programs at a deep level? How do you ensure that this no longer controls your life? Awareness is just the first step, very important one, but the first one. True transformation happens when you don't just understand the problem, but integrate it, so that it no longer repeats itself in your reactions, choices, and relationships. That's why I created Method of 3 I's, a system that works with the subconscious, helping to integrate trauma so it no longer affects your decisions. If you're ready to start this process, my Healing Childhood Trauma course can be your first step. You'll find the link in the description below. If you missed the last enrollment, you can sign up for the next round by reaching out to our support team. This is your chance to not just understand what's happening to you, but to actively change your story. The support team is reachable through the link in the description. So the best way to break the cycle of violence is to stop passing it on. You have the power to change your story. No one deserves to be raised through fear. If you were hit as a child, it wasn't your fault. But now, it's your responsibility to see the truth and rewrite your story. Thank you for watching this video. If you've made it this far, you're already on the path of change. Subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and turn on notifications so you don't miss more videos that will help you understand yourself on a deeper level. Love is not pain, and you deserve more. Drop a comment. Have you ever heard the phrase, "I was hit as a child and I turned out fine"? I want to hear your stories.